On this episode of A State of Control, we're talking about documentation and what's the best way to make sure you understand your code 6 months down the road. All that and more next on A State of Control.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
A State of Control is brought to you by our fine group of underwriters, companies like Kramer Electronics. A State of Control. This is A State of Control, episode 24, recorded Thursday, June 2nd, 2016. Help a brother out.
Welcome to A State of Control, AVNation's podcast that is dedicated to control, automation, and programming in the AV industry. My name is Steve Greenblatt. I'm your host today, and I'm filling some big shoes of Tim Albright, who is still joining us, but we have a little role reversal today. So first on our panel today is Tim, the founder of AVNation.
Hello.
How are you this morning, Tim?
Doing good, sir.
Great. And second is everybody's favorite uncle, Uncle Richie, Rich Fregosa.
Happy to see you. Mellow West Coast greetings as usual. Good to see you guys. Good job on the intro, Steve. I'm liking it.
Thanks.
I feel like we're having like a coffee chat.
Working on it. So and third, and last but not least, is Chip Moody from Video Corporation of America, a fine Crestron programmer and colleague. Good morning, Chip.
How do?
How are you?
Doing all right, thanks. Great.
So today our topic is about the system upgrades, let's call it. A mentor of mine told me a while back that an AV system is a living, breathing organism. It's not something that you just do and it's complete. And to that point, looking at programming and you're looking at designing a system, we have to think about how to plan for the future. So, Rich, I'll start with you. Especially in a residential project, those seem to go on forever. How do you go about predicting what the future needs are going to be and setting yourself up for changes and upgrades?
Well, I think just like what you were talking about with a system being an organism, it's true. We've always had the saying that we're not done, we're just done for today. And part of it is it's like, I mean, we've spoken about this several times on other podcasts about scope creep and expectation management and being able to define what done means. What done is. What you have to get an agreement at first, at least at what done is. I think what we've learned over the years now, because again, we now have systems. I know personally, I have systems that are going on their 25th year. That we are much more focused on the concept of scalability, and the reason why we have to be focused on scalability is because we have more connected devices. And if you take it back 20 years ago, it's only a handful of things that you could control. And whether it was residential or commercial or boardroom, there was X, Y, or Z. You just this was what was available. And what's happening now with systems is that there's so many more options. There's so many more interconnection points, and there's so many more ways for a user to access it. It requires software architecture. In the old days when we were cowboys, you just kind of threw it together. You didn't really worry about what was going to happen next year. You didn't worry about what was going to happen 5 years down the line. And what's happening now is that we're having to use rigid, established procedures for deploying software, and it's good. I hope that maturation process continues. I know for us, our rule has always been document. We always build with where we're going to be several years down the line, and the reason why we've done that is because we've had to come back several years down the line on our projects, on other people's projects, and the first problem is, you can only rely on your memory so much. And so that's what we've learned, is that as long as you have documentation and you do the little things that seem like an inconvenience at that moment, that's when you should be doing it. Because, everybody's always under the gun, and we've got the deadline, and it's got to be ready to go tomorrow, and, the clients are going to show up, or this, that, or the other thing, and you start skirting around the details. You start letting those go to the wayside, and I'll get to it next week. I'll get to it when we come back on the cleanup. You got to stop and do it. And so our approach, and again, we've had the same issues. I mean, I haven't always done it, but our goal always is to make sure that you deal with the little things now, because when you come back a year later and you can't remember it, or the person who wrote it has left, or any of these other things, you can go in and pull it. And we go so far as we put our documentation in our program. We have just notes, just scads of notes inside our program. Tim will attest to this. I've kind of hammered this time and time again, because somebody will say, well, where's the connection sheet, or where's the input list, or where's the IP scheme, or everything else? And a lot of times we'll talk to the tech. They don't have it because they didn't show up on site with it. So what do? We open up our program and boom, there it is. We have our IP list, our input list, our output list. And it does nothing for the program other than for somebody to quickly go in and say, oh, that's where this stuff was. Again, like I said, the little things that are inconvenient at the moment are the things that we try to focus and get out of the way immediately.
Real quickly on that, because Richie's taught me more than probably I'll ever retain about programming. He drilled this into me, and one thing it does that he didn't even mention, it is a true as-build. If you do it that way and you do it correctly, it is an honest-to-goodness, living, breathing as-builds. No, it's not something you're going to give to the client, but it gives your programmer, and honestly, like he mentioned, it, as an extension, your team, an as-build as you go along. And, oh yeah, by the way, 6 months down the road, the as-builds may not have gotten documented correctly, right? But who knows what port something's going to? The programmer. Because he's the one and she's the one that had to adjust their code because somebody didn't plug it in the right port, and sometimes it's easier just to switch it, to switch the output port, port A, port B, whatever. And then if you're documenting it that way, that, and you can pass along that information.
So to that point, is the programmer the one that is responsible for that, or is it something that is just a natural evolution that the code ends up becoming the Bible for a system?
I personally think if you're hired on a project, you're responsible for maintaining the documentation and tool set you need to do your job. And I think that needs to be built into your fee structure and your expectations. And we call it the white glove service, right? There are projects where somebody comes in and there's a request for bid, and you've got to chop everything out. That becomes a business decision, where it becomes a matter of, do you take the job? Do you do less than your quality work, quote unquote, in order to get the job? Well, at that point, you're not in partnership. You're a hired gun. And mercenary work is fine. I mean, mercenary work pays the bills at times. You get a call, you move in, bang, bang. It's not a friendship. It's not a partnership. You're there to do a job and get something done. And I think in projects like that, depending on the relationship that you have or don't have, you can take a fine line and say, hey, this is not my job. You need to go back and you need to fix this and call me when that's ready. Professionally, personally, my personal belief system, I've never gone that way. I've never felt that I need to count on somebody else to do my job. I want to work with them to do my job. Everybody's opinion on it is different, and it's a business decision at times. But I know I had a project personally where we've had got like 85 zones of audio, and trying to reference it on the connection list, which it's a very well documented project. But like minute by minute, when something went down or we had a technical issue, I could find my answer in 15 seconds rather than trying to go back and go through the documentation list and pull it up. And was that the current version? And do they have the on-site version? And is this a new tech who just called me who it's his first time showing up to this site? When I can pull it up and I can take a look at each one of my devices and know that amplifier 4 output 6 is the second dressing room, and we can very quickly deal with it. I'm providing value, they're getting the job done, and honestly, I'm able to get onto the next job more quickly. So for me, it's cost effective, because then I'm not having to run around and worry about whose job it is in the first place.
Sure. So Chip, I'll turn it over to you. Working for an integration firm, and having kind of all of that under one roof, where do you find yourself in terms of being the one responsible for keeping track of versions, keeping track of the latest documentation, and also being able to maintain a system?
I've been fortunate where systems we've done haven't had the need for scalability in the future. The most that I've encountered is a year or two down the road, we're taking out this codec and putting in a new one. So packages might require a little bit of splicing for new logic and whatnot, but not the expansion that I'm hearing everybody else talk about.
Sure, I get it. Tim, in a previous life, I know you managed programmers, and one of the things that I know is challenging for programmers is to have to go back to code or even look at somebody else's code. What's the experience, or what's the best way, I think, of approaching either a system that either you have done and have to come back to years later, or even walking into a system that somebody else has done?
Well, I'm going to steal a line from both you and Rich that you guys both taught me, that if you haven't touched your program in 6 months, it might as well be somebody else who wrote it, right? I don't care who you are, unless you have an ironclad memory, most likely. Even if you're the one who wrote it, it's going to take a while to come back to you. So that's documentation, and that's nomenclature. I've opened up programs before, whether it's AMX or Crestron, whether it's Simple Windows or Simple Plus, or now Simple Sharp, where people just start typing or dragging modules over or dragging logic symbols over with no rhyme or reason. I mean, you're going to have 15 iterations of, in Crestron Simple Windows, 15 iterations of an init, right, an initialize command. You have no idea what any of those do, right? So I named and encouraged our guys to name every single instance of a command, right? Just documenting exactly what it is and what it's supposed to do. Getting programmers on the same page is sometimes interesting, if not difficult and impossible, but at least getting them on the same page of naming all this stuff. I had two really good programmers who would battle over what the prefix for a button press should be, and I do mean battle. And both of them were right. I mean, I could see both of their, but the fact at least that they were doing that, right? They at least, they were at least, knowledgeable enough and said, that you got to do this. And actually, one of them was one of the guys that showed me, you've got to make sure that I don't care if your command is 25 characters long. Tell me where it's going. Tell me what it's doing, right? So it goes back to Rich's point about documenting inside the program while you're writing. Because, like I said, none of us have ironclad memories, and we need to be able to pass along what we're doing. But here's the other thing. If you document a program well while you're writing it, you can use it as a training tool. Because then you can hand somebody a program, and if you still have the scope of work, you still have the drawings, you can say, here's the end result of these drawings, right? And kind of walk them through it.
And I want to add a point to that, and one of the things that to consider, and I've had this discussion with people several times, is that we also have to remember that we are writing purpose-driven code, right? Our code just isn't generic. It isn't just like, we're tossing it out there and hoping somebody buys it. And there is a different approach when you are taking a purpose-driven approach, which is you are there to achieve a result that somebody has laid out and said, this is what I want. So part of what we do, and this is where I personally buck kind of from the convention of, traditional software design, which is, the flexibility and the genericism and the naming. And I used to tell Tim this all the time. My feeling is that if I can't write the instruction manual from the programming notes, you failed, because you don't have enough information at that point. Signals that I use, Could I break it down to 5 characters to save myself some typing? Yeah, I could. Or could I call it room 1 instead of the master bath? Yeah, I could. But when I'm trying to debug a problem, I'm going to spend half an hour trying to remember what room 36 is, as opposed to going, oh, that's the pool house, right? So there's a fine line in between that you constantly have to look at and go, am I trying to take this and decide that, in the grand scheme, I want to sell 1,000 of these? And I may be speaking more to residential, because residential is going to be a lot more unique than, say, a boardroom or a huddle space or any of those other spaces. But I think it still does apply. If you got to deploy 300 classrooms, that's a whole lot different than a 20,000 square foot house. They're completely different animals. So, it does depend on where you're coming at it, and also how you're relaying it to other members of the team. I'm in one of those unique positions that I'm not only the person that's coding, but I'm typically the client liaison. I'm the one who is working as the client agent and working with the integrator and working with 4 other trades. So not only do I have to be the guy who makes it all work, I've got to be able to get that information to other people. So for us, it's always been a matter of, how can we break it down to the lowest common denominator for everybody to understand? And it is a decision, and I think that comes back to, as the programmer, you do have to know your environment, and you do not have to know your projects, and you do not have to know the individuals involved. But I again, like I keep saying is, and like we were talking with Tim, is that you're going to have to come back to it eventually. So you might as well cover your butt.
Sure. So Chip, when you're faced with those situations, and I know that you have other programmers that you work with, do you have any way of being able to have you defined standards, and is that something that you live by and you ask others to work within, or does everybody kind of have their own style?
No, it's definitely, everybody has their own style, and going with the understanding that somebody might be looking at my code later on, I try and be explicit with things like, especially in simple Windows, signal names. I keep those very verbose. Along with that, comments on the symbols that those signals are associated with. You can go back and look at the symbols themselves, and the descriptive text next to those symbols should help explain what they're trying to accomplish. So, I at least try to do that with the thought that somebody later on, even if it's me a few months later on, is going to be looking at this code trying to make sense of that stuff. As far as saying to another programmer, you should keep this stuff in that folder and that other stuff in this other. No, definitely not like that.
Sure. So it sounds to me like there's you're still following along with what Rich and Tim are saying, is provide as much documentation as possible, but there really is not one method to use.
No, there's definitely not one method.
Well, what do you guys do in-house, Steve? I mean, you're now at the point, like you were saying, that you're not necessarily the one tapping at the keyboard anymore. So how do you maintain your consistency? Obviously the whole goal is that anything that comes out of your company should follow, the company. It shouldn't necessarily be individual. You don't want it to be a Picasso and then a Monet on the other project, right? Right.
Yeah. So it for us, it's the outer result and the product itself needs to be consistent, but what's under the hood is going to vary from person to person, and I'm just curious as to how far have people gone with providing standards, because we actually had a programmer leave our company recently, and I've had a number of people have to go back and review and modify his code, and it's definitely caused us to rethink and potentially sit down as a group and discuss how we should be doing things, because unfortunately things like that happen, and we don't get ourselves in that many situations where we're handing off code, but it's inevitable that you're going to have to work with somebody else's code, and what that person did is probably going to live for years. So we're going to have to figure out a good way of dealing with it, but also when we're working together with our team or with new people in the future, what can we do to either make that situation a lot easier or prevent some of the challenges that we're facing?
The way we took it, and this is really, probably, I'm going to say maybe in only the past 5 years that we've done it. Somebody brought it up, and it was a brilliant point. Was that we went from the debugging tools backwards. So the debugging tools for different manufacturers, are just different. But obviously we do a lot of Crestron, and the debugging tools are alphabetical, right? But there's a hierarchy on top of it with special symbols. So what we did is we looked at the debugging tools and we went through the hierarchy of the symbols that could go. So a bracket would be higher than a paren, and a left and right arrow would be lower than a brace. And so we looked at it and we went, okay, well, there's our built-in hierarchy. And so we looked at it and we went backwards and went, okay, we know that our system level is going to be the top symbol. So you would have, let's just paren AV, paren security, paren cameras. And so we knew very quickly from a debugging standpoint, if somebody calls and says, oh, camera 1 isn't working right, we know to be able to go back in, start at the top level hierarchy and go, okay, bring it up and expand from there. And then we looked at further, we went, okay, once we got inside there, what's the next symbol in the hierarchy? And it was like, oh, well, brace. Okay, well then AV, brace, room 1. So now you have a very quick structure to be able to go back. Because honestly, the reason why you comment in the first place is debugging. And anybody who says they don't is lying, right? This is all about making your debugging easier. This is all about making your deployment easier. It's not about making it pretty. It's not about showing. We're not going to bring it to our class and get a gold star on it at the end, right? It's got to be something that either makes you money or saves you money, right? And one of the two ways to do it is look at your tools, and I think that's something that we sometimes forget. We do get caught up a little bit in just the day-to-day of things, and we don't want to admit problems, and that's always it. I mean, control system programmers, we got freaking egos. There's egos involved.
No.
And so when you can kind of take a step back and say, hey, look, this is how can we help? And I've been doing this more and more personally, going, look, I don't care how you're doing it. I just want to help you. And let me show you the ways that you can get this done faster. I want you to go home at 4 o'clock on a Friday. I don't want you there till 9 o'clock at night. So let's find something, that makes it a little bit easier. And more importantly, I don't want to be there at 9 o'clock at night because I let you go at 4. So
Absolutely.
Again, I think where we've taken at this point now is debugging. And then you can tell, because a good code you can debug easier. And bad code, you're going to spend a whole lot of time trying to debug it. And that's the important part, because the only time you're going to get called is when there's a problem. So you might as well put the tools in place to save yourself some frustration.
Sure. So Tim, I think you and I are probably in similar situations, when you were running a programming company where you had a customer that you had to help them service existing systems. Mm-hmm. That's always a challenge. So how do you go about assessing the existing code for a project and knowing that the customer, their idea that this should be something simple, and simple usually means low cost, mm-hmm. but just to get your head into a code and figure out what's what and understand the risk that you're assuming is a feat. So how do you make that into something that works business wise?
So from a business standpoint, and again, everything we're saying today is obviously you have to make your own business decision for it. We did time and materials when it came to existing systems for two reasons. First of all, yes, they might have the code and they could send it to us and we could spend a little bit trying to wrap our head around it. But the one caveat to that is I can't guarantee until I touch that processor that that's the code that's loaded. Whether it's it might be named the same, but you can upload it. You can upload the same name, but change something in there, or I can look at the upload date. Oh, hey, when was the last time you had a programmer out here? Oh, it's been years and years and years, and you look at the tools, and oh yeah, somebody uploaded something last week, which actually happened to coincide with the same time they called you, oddly enough. We did time and materials simply because there's too many variables, right? There's too many variables, and you can't make a good business decision based on that. Right now, that's not saying that we didn't do them. Absolutely, you do them, but you go in there and you manage expectations. Say, look, here here are the gotchas that I'm facing, right, as a programmer and as a business owner. So you're going to have to share in some of this pain. Mm-hmm. Now, if they didn't want time and materials, we'd say, okay, $10,000. And, or something ridiculous, some ridiculous amount of money to where they understood. You can do time and materials at whatever you charge an hour, or you can do some ungodly amount of money to guarantee me that I'm not, going to lose money by helping you out.
Sure. I guess another question, and I'll ask you, Chip, is when you are modifying code, how do you make a decision as to if you can salvage what's existing or if you have to kind of go back to the drawing board? Because I know, and and Rich and Tim know that when the more you lop on to code, even no matter how well it was written, it eventually starts to get ugly.
I feel very bad for a fellow programmer over here because that has happened to him at least once or twice in the recent past, where he's inherited code from another place and he's like, oh, I don't know, should we do this from scratch or just add on to this? And I've glanced and said, you want to do that from scratch, and he winds up not taking advice and adding on, and he'll come back to me a month later going, I should have done it from scratch. It's usually, unless the program is absolutely monstrous, it's usually seems like it's easy enough to go in, look at what's in the code, and make a determination like, oh yeah, this is really straightforward, or this is clear cut, I can add on to this easily. Or you could also, seems to me, just as quickly go in, get a feel for, oh wow, this is really bad, I should just, and especially considering what's being added, are the additions going to make extending that functionality more effort than it's worth? Well then toss that out, say thank you, but we're going to do it from scratch.
Sure. So Rich, from a business standpoint and your perspective, how do you have that conversation with the customer when you are trying to determine if you are going to modify what they have or start over, and there's obviously pros and cons to both?
To be perfectly honest, about 70% of my work is just this. And we have a very simple, hard and fast rule that we draw for people, and we give them a choice. We have a scope for a rewrite that we create, but the problem is that they've already been disappointed. They already feel that, generally by the time we've called, we're doing triage, for lack of a better term. So there's some trust issues. There's some concerns about throwing good money after bad. Again, I might be just another guy selling them on the story of what it's going to do, and I'll be another guy that's going to charge them a whole lot of money, and it'll never work, and ... So our approach has been pretty simple, and we found that we've been pretty effective with it, is that we give them the option, which is, kind of in the feeling out period, we'll say, look, here's the deal. You have a processor that's already there. We're going to leave it locked down. And what we're going to do is we're going to bring in a separate processor. And this is where I live. And what I'm going to do, and this way I can't get blamed for anything that's broken, because all I'm going to do right now, I we'll give them a scope. And we're like, look, to take it from where you need to be, and we show them the examples, and, we give them the idea of what their system can actually do. But they go, no, I'm not ready for that. We're not quite sure. And we go, great. Okay, well, here's the interim solution. In order to build it, we're going to lock that unit down, and we're going to basically say, this is everything that it does. We're going to leave it be. And what we are going to do is we are going to bridge into what's there. So if something's broken, it was already broken. If we're making something work better, then we're assisting on our side, and then we pull our interface out. And we go to the point where we even bring out a separate interface. And so we start them with training wheels, get them built up on the idea of, okay, here's that line of demarcation. And some people look at it and say, great. Other people are like, no, we're now at the point where we can move on. But at the very least, it draws the opportunity to say, because again, you invariably get it. Well, it used to work in the old system. Well, unless you have the opportunity to get hired to do a button-by-button breakdown of the existing system, that's a fight you're not always going to win, because the revisionist history starts coming into play. So what we do is we eliminate that obstacle, and we literally draw our own 38 parallel. We're like, look, we're going to provide a small processor. This processor is going to have code that we know is good and valid. And all we are going to do is, you've got this TV over here, you've got this codec over here, you've got this camera over here. All we're going to do is touch the buttons of those things over there. And then if the breakdown is there, then we're going to know a little bit better on how to isolate it. And then we can give you a better scope of work over the long term. At times we'll even credit it because it's already part of our, because again, what we're deploying is already part of our framework. And so we found that to be a way to reduce the blow a little bit, build some trust, and then set yourself up to succeed. At least that's been my recommendation.
Sure, that makes sense. I can relate there, and I know that we have these internal discussions, and I think that it's one of those things where you do have to be upfront with the customer, and I know that everybody prefers to work with their own code, but sometimes we have to work with what's existing, and I think there are pros and cons, but part of it is actually thinking ahead and determining is this an isolated revision, or are they going to be growing with this code, and does it make sense to kind of test the waters with the idea of a rewrite?
Exactly, and it is, and it's that's the business decision. From the code standpoint, you're just going to be like, well, start it over. Every programmer I know has opened up every other programmer's code and gone, this is garbage. What were they thinking? Oh my God, why did you pay money for this? Right? It's just, it's like the trash talk of programming. I've always laughed, and hey, people have taken over my code, and I know for a fact that there was some code that I wrote, early on that was rough. And I would open my programs from years ago and go, oh, that was rough. But it's a cumulative experience, and the one thing that I've always looked at is that you never know what pressure or the environment or the way that company who was hired, you never quite understand the situation that they're in. So you can, there's a point where my feeling's always been, you're always going to take over somebody's code, and I guarantee somebody's always going to take over yours. There's no way that you can't be in this business for any extended period of time that those things aren't going to happen.
Sure.
And so we collectively kind of got to help a brother out.
Absolutely. So we're kind of at our time for today, and this has been a great experience, and I would like to thank our guests, Chip Moody from VCA. Thanks for joining us today, Chip.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Great. Glad to have you, and hope to have you back. Is there any way that the audience can reach out to you and connect with you?
I'm real easy to find on Facebook. That's probably the easiest way. Otherwise, emails, chipmoody@vcaglobal.com. We've recently had a change in our main, domain name. So it's not just vca.com anymore. It's vcaglobal.com.
Duly noted. Thank you.
Thank you.
And of course, Uncle Richie, thanks for being here, and I appreciate your support and accompaniment, and look forward to the next episode. How can the audience reach you?
Probably the best ways is got it. There we go. On the Twitters. You can type in my name in the Googles and stuff will show up. Fregosa Design and ePro and all the other things. And I want to say I feel like it was I was like in a Senate hearing, and so I took Mr. Lavecchia's time. He gave his minutes to me.
And I'm sure that he'll ask you for them back one day.
He will ask for them back the next time. So sorry, Mark couldn't make it, but
we may have to make that an hour episode.
Oh, good Lord, yes.
Exactly. But let's see. You'll be seeing us hopefully soon at CEDIA. So.
Excellent. Thank you. And last but not least, Tim Albright from AVNation. I'm sure you have a lot to share with regard to Infocom, and thanks for joining, and thanks for your support.
Absolutely, sir. You did a good job. I'm really excited. This is something we're doing. I'm not stepping away. I'm not going anywhere. But Steve's taking over this one. EdTech is being taken over by one of our technology managers, because I'm not a technology manager anymore. I'm not for nothing, but I enjoy the expertise that people that actually do this are doing. So thank you for the time. Infocom, Infocom is N as in Nancy 2821 is our booth. Come by and get a suntan, because we've got a 16-foot by 5-foot prime view display wall. Holy cow! That's going to be in our booth. It's going to be we're turning our booth into a broadcast studio so for all of our shows. So that and all of our folks are teaching classes. Josh Frego's teaching classes. I'm teaching 3 or 4 classes. A bunch of stuff, and we have the tweet up going on. Our guys would kill me if I didn't mention that. Thursday, in is Nancy 205 from 4 to 6. Free food and drink and networking. So so thanks, Steve.
Very cool. No, I appreciate it. Thank you. I will certainly be at the tweet up as well as coming by the booth and be at the AV Week recording. And I just wanted to share with everybody. Last year's tweet up was jam-packed, and I assume this year's will be as well. And
we got a bigger room this year.
It's the place to be.
I'm just going to say we got a bigger room. If you were at last year's tweet up, we got a room twice the size, so won't be quite as packed.
So the goal is to pack this one, huh?
Yeah.
So you can follow me at Steve Greenblatt. My website is controlconcepts.net. We're actually in the middle of a new website launch. We'll be available at Infocom and new branding and so forth. So I'm excited to share that with everybody. And last but not least, visit AVNation.tv. There's a whole bunch of podcasts to share. A few coming out. AV Week, Resi Week on a weekly basis. AV Social and Connected, a few that I listen to regularly. And please go by the website and check it out and see a bunch of coverage from Infocom as well. So that's AVNation.tv. So that's all we have for today. Thank you for joining us. This has been The State of Control.